If you've ever poured your heart and soul into a job only to be told you're a relic, that your experience is a liability, then you're going to want to hear this. My story isn't just about getting fired, it's about what happens when a company forgets that its greatest asset isn't a patent or a product, but the people who know how to build it. Stick around because this is about the high price of cheap management. Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen a new boss come in and try to fix what was never broken, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting what you're worth. My name is Grant, and for 27 years I was the Director of Research and Development at a company that used to pride itself on being at the bleeding edge of material science. I wasn't just an employee, I was part of the foundation. I started there when the labs were a fraction of the size, when we had to improvise equipment and stretch every dollar of a research grant until it screamed. I saw the company grow from a plucky underdog into a market leader, and my team's work, was the engine of that growth. We developed the polymers that made their first big product line a success, the composites that put them on the map in the aerospace sector, and the thermal shielding that won us a government contract that kept the lights on through 2 recessions. My name was on 17 different patents, all of them assigned to the company, of course. That's the deal you make. You trade your intellectual creations for a steady paycheck and the resources to keep creating. For a long time it felt like a fair trade, but things change. The founder, a brilliant but aging chemist who understood the soul of our work, retired. He was replaced by a board-approved CEO named David, a man whose background was in leveraged buyouts, not beakers and burn-in tests. David didn't see a lab full of innovators, he saw a cost center. He spoke a different language, a dialect of efficiencies and optimizations and shareholder value. The culture began to curdle, slowly at first, then all at once. The first sign was the hiring of Camille. She arrived with the title of Chief Innovation Officer, a role that sounded both grand and meaningless. Camille was in her early 40s, sharp, impeccably dressed, with an MBA from a school that costs more than my first house. She walked through our labs not with the curiosity of a scientist, but with the cold appraisal of an auctioneer evaluating assets for liquidation. She spoke in a flurry of buzzwords that made my teeth ache. Synergy, agility, lean methodology, disruptive paradigms. To her, research wasn't a process of discovery, it was a series of sprints and deliverables that had to fit neatly onto a Gantt chart. Her favorite target was me. In her eyes, I was the old guard, a walking embodiment of everything she was hired to eliminate. I was too slow, too methodical. My projects were too expensive, too ambitious. She'd look at my budget requests, with line items for rare earth elements or custom-built furnaces, and her lip would curl. "Grant," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension, "we need to be failing faster. These long-term, high-cost explorations are a drag on our agility." I tried to explain that in material science, you don't fail fast. You experiment, you document, you learn from meticulously recorded failures over months, sometimes years. A failed experiment that teaches you something is not a failure, it's a data point. She would just smile, that tight, bloodless smile, and say, "That's the old way of thinking." The final battleground was the battery project. It was my magnum opus, the culmination of a decade of my own independent study. The goal was a solid-state battery that would be smaller, safer, and hold 5 times the charge of the best lithium-ion cells on the market. It was a holy grail, something that could revolutionize everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. The company had been paying lip service to the idea for years, but they never truly funded it. The budget was a joke, barely enough to keep a couple of junior techs employed. They starved it of resources, denied my requests for crucial equipment, and buried my proposals under mountains of bureaucratic red tape. So I did what any passionate scientist would do. I took my work home. Over the last 10 years, I had converted my 2-car garage, and the basement beneath it, into a personal laboratory that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, the one at work. It was my sanctuary. Every spare dollar, every bonus, went into it. I had a custom one-tube furnace capable of reaching 2,000 degrees Celsius with an inert argon atmosphere. I had a scanning electron microscope I'd bought at a university surplus auction. I had glove boxes, precision measurement tools, and chemical fume hoods with their own dedicated ventilation system. My wife, Sarah, used to joke that she was a lab widow, but she understood what it meant to me. She saw the light in my eyes when I'd come upstairs, smelling faintly of ozone and hot metal, to tell her about a small breakthrough. While the corporate lab was hamstrung by Camille's lean budgets, my home lab was where the real work on the battery happened, on my own time, with my own money, using my own equipment. I kept meticulous notes in a series of thick, leather-bound logbooks. Every material formulation, every supplier for the proprietary ceramic powders I was using, every temperature curve for the sintering process, every single one of the 4,317 failed fabrication attempts, and the one successful method I finally perfected, it was all there, in my notebooks, on my personal hard drives. It was my intellectual property, born from my own resources and my own time. I knew the law. Work done on your own time with your own tools, on your own property, belongs to you unless you have a contract that explicitly states otherwise. My 27-year-old employment agreement was laughably vague on the topic. It was a loophole you could drive a truck through. Back at the office, I played the part. I gave Camille sanitized, high-level updates. I'd bring in prototypes, sealed, inert, functional units I'd built in my garage for testing. They were miracles. They exceeded every benchmark. The energy density was off the charts. They could be charged and discharged thousands of times with almost no degradation. Camille was ecstatic. She saw the prototypes not as the result of a long, arduous scientific journey, but as a product that had magically appeared. She presented the data to David, the CEO, as a triumph of her new agile R&D strategy. She took full credit. I watched her do it in a quarterly meeting, a smug smile on her face, and I just let her. I knew something she didn't. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The firing came on a Tuesday. It was clinical, almost comically so. I was summoned to a conference room I'd never been in before. It was all glass and white leather, a room designed for people who sell things, not for people who make them. Camille was there, along with a woman from HR I'd never seen before. Camille didn't waste time. "Grant," she began, her voice devoid of any real emotion. "As you know, the company is moving in a new, more dynamic direction. We're streamlining our processes and focusing on rapid market-driven innovation." I just sat there, my hands resting on the cold, sterile table. I knew what was coming. I'd felt it in the air for months. As part of this restructuring, she continued, "Your position as director of R&D is being eliminated." The HR woman slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "The severance package. We appreciate your many years of service," Camille said, the words as hollow as a drum. "But your methods are frankly too slow for the pace we need to set. Your projects are too expensive, and your leadership style isn't aligned with the collaborative fast-fail culture we're building." She gestured toward the envelope. "The company is making a generous offer. We'll need you to sign the standard non-disclosure and non-compete agreements. Your personal effects will be boxed up and couriered to your home." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the unearned confidence, the utter lack of understanding of what she was doing. She thought she was cutting a bloated salary from her budget. She had no idea she was cutting the company's lifeline. She was particularly excited about the battery. "The launch of the new Novacell battery is our top priority," she said, her eyes gleaming. "The prototypes are incredible, a real game changer. I'm putting a new, more agile team on it to get it ready for mass production. They'll be able to scale it up in a fraction of the time it would have taken your old department." I almost laughed. The new, more agile team was a handful of junior chemists and a project manager who thought a semiconductor was a part-time orchestra conductor. They were good kids, but they were being set up for a spectacular failure. They had the prototypes. Yes, 4 perfect little silver rectangles that I had personally built in my garage. But that's all they had. They had the destination, but the map, the compass and the keys to the vehicle were in my head, and in the logbook sitting on a shelf in my basement. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't get angry. I just nodded slowly. I understand, I said. My calmness seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. I stood up, left the envelope on the table, and walked toward the door. Grant, she called out, a slight edge in her voice. You need to sign the paperwork. I paused at the door and looked back. Send it to my lawyer, I said. And Camille, good luck with the scale-up. I walked out of that building for the last time, the cool afternoon air feeling like the first breath of a new life. They had the shiny prototypes, the marketing plan, and the buzzword spouting executive. But I had the research. I had the material logs. I had the fabrication data. I had everything that mattered, and they didn't even know it. The war wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. The drive home was strangely silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The hum of the engine was the only sound. A steady drone that filled the space where the chaos of my thoughts should have been. I've always been a methodical man. My mind works like a series of gates. I process one thing, then the next. But in that car all the gates were thrown open at once. 27 years, a career that had started with youthful enthusiasm and ended in a sterile conference room with a woman who used the word paradigm as a weapon. I thought about the first lab I'd built out, scavenging equipment from other departments. I remembered the thrill of our first major patent, celebrating with cheap pizza and warm beer, with a team that felt more like family than colleagues. All of it erased in a 10-minute meeting. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was quiet. Sarah was still at work. I walked through the front door and stood in the foyer, the silence amplifying the feeling of being untethered. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, I had nowhere to be tomorrow, no problems to solve, no team to lead, no data to analyze. The feeling wasn't freedom. It was a vacuum. A knot of something cold and heavy formed in my stomach. It was the weight of being discarded. I bypassed the kitchen, bypassed the living room, and went straight down the basement stairs. I flipped a series of switches, and the space flooded with the clean, white light of halogen work lamps. My lab. My real lab. It smelled of solder and isopropyl alcohol and the faint, earthy scent of the ceramic powders I used. This place was my real office, my real legacy. The company had just been a sponsor, and a reluctant one at that. I ran my hand over the cool stainless steel of the glove box. I looked at the neatly organized rows of chemicals, the spools of specialty wire, the complex array of wiring and pipes that fed the tube furnace. Every single piece of it I had chosen, installed, and paid for. I remembered the weekend I'd spent running the dedicated 220-volt line for the furnace, the argument with Sarah about the cost of the scanning electron microscope, the late nights spent calibrating sensors until my eyes burned. This wasn't a hobby, it was the center of my professional life, hidden in plain sight. The company Innovatech had become a place of performance, of pretending. In meetings, I'd nod along as Camille talked about cross-functional synergy, while knowing full well that the only synergy happening was between the materials in my crucible at home. She'd once held a 2-day mandatory off-site retreat to reimagine our innovative core. It involved trust falls and writing our feelings on colorful sticky notes. I spent that entire weekend analyzing spectrographic data from a new material batch that was showing promise, remotely accessing my lab's computer from the back of the conference room, while a motivational speaker told us to embrace our inner disruptor. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I walked over to the heavy metal shelf against the far wall and pulled down one of the logbooks. It was bound in dark green leather, the spine showing the wear of constant use. I opened it to a random page. My own handwriting, a dense, blocky script, filled the page with chemical formulas, temperature graphs, and notes in the margins. Batch hash 2841, catastrophic dendritic growth at 950 C. Hypothesis, contamination from crucible C. Recommend quartz lining for next attempt. Another entry. Batch hash 3017, stable cycling, but energy density remains 12% below target. Is the nickel-manganese-cobalt ratio wrong, or is it the doping agent? This was the work, not the PowerPoints, not the budget meetings, not the HR-mandated sensitivity training. This, the slow, painstaking, often frustrating process of elimination, of trying 10,000 things that didn't work to find the one that did. Camille saw the successful prototype as the entire story. She couldn't comprehend that the prototype was just the last page of a very long, very expensive book, and I owned the only copy of the manuscript. My mind flashed back to a specific budget meeting 6 months ago. I had put in a request for a new high-purity sputtering coater. It was a $100,000 piece of equipment, essential for applying the nanometer-thin layers of electrolyte that made the solid-state battery possible. Without it, scaling up for production would be impossible. Camille had looked at the proposal and laughed. A short, sharp barking sound. Grant, $100,000 for one machine? We need to be smarter with our capital allocation, she'd said, as if I were a child asking for a pony. There are more cost-effective deposition techniques. Have your team look into chemical vapor deposition. I had stared at her dumbfounded. Camille, we've tried CVD. The film integrity is poor. It creates microfractures under thermal stress. The sputtering coater is the only way to get the purity and uniformity we need. She had waved a dismissive hand. Find another way. Be innovative. That's what I'm paying you for. The request is denied. 2 weeks later, I bought a used sputtering coater from a defunct solar panel company in Arizona. I paid for it with my own money, out of a personal line of credit. I had it shipped to a friend's workshop, where we disassembled it, moved it into my basement in pieces, and spent the next 3 weekends reassembling and calibrating it. That machine, sitting in the corner of my lab, was the key to manufacturing the Novacell, and my name was on the bill of sale. The front door opened and closed upstairs. Grant? It was Sarah. Her voice was cautious. I closed the logbook and went upstairs. She was standing in the kitchen, her coat still on, her purse on the counter. She looked at my face, and she knew instantly. Her expression shifted from concern to a slow-burning anger, but it wasn't directed at me. They did it, didn't they? She said softly. I just nodded. My position was eliminated, effective immediately. She came over and wrapped her arms around me. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She was a pragmatist, a high school principal who dealt with real problems all day. She understood injustice. That woman, she said, her voice tight. Camille, she said I was too slow, a bottleneck. Sarah pulled back and looked me in the eye. Grant, for the last 5 years you have worked 60-hour weeks. You've missed anniversaries. You've skipped vacations. You've poured your life into that battery project, a project they refused to properly fund. You did it in the basement, on your own dime, because you believed in it. And she calls you a bottleneck. It's just how it is, I said, the words feeling weak even as I said them. No, she said, her voice firm, cutting through my haze of self-pity. It's not. It's theft. They let you do all the hard work, solve all the impossible problems, and just when it's about to pay off, they cut you out and take the credit. They didn't just fire you, Grant. They robbed you. Her words were like a jolt of electricity. She was right. I had been so focused on the insult, the dismissal, that I hadn't fully appreciated the scale of the heist they had just attempted to pull off. They thought they owned the finished product, because it was developed while I was on their payroll, but they had actively prevented the work from happening on their property with their resources. They had, through their own cheapness and bureaucratic incompetence, forced me to create it as my own personal property. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, her gaze unwavering. I thought about the severance package sitting on that white leather table. It would come with strings, a non-compete that would sideline me for a year or more. They wanted to put me on a shelf while they figured out how to monetize my life's work. "I'm not going to sign anything," I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. "I'm going to call Arthur." Arthur was a friend from college who had gone into patent law. We played golf a few times a year, and I'd picked his brain about IP law more than once, always framing it as a hypothetical. He knew about my lab. He knew about the company's neglect. "And the battery?" Sarah asked. "All that work. Grant, what about the prototypes they have?" A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled all day. "They have 4 of them," I said. 4 perfect, beautiful little bricks. They can analyze them, they can x-ray them, they can cut them apart molecule by molecule. It won't matter. They can see what's in it, but they will never ever be able to figure out how to make another one. Not without my notes. She saw the shift in my eyes. The fog of defeat was burning away, replaced by the cold, clear light of strategy. "They think they have the goose that lays the golden eggs," I continued. "What they actually have is a single golden egg, and they just shot the goose." Sarah's expression softened. She put her hand on my cheek. "They didn't value you, Grant. For years I've watched them take you for granted. It's time you valued yourself. What do you want to do?" I looked past her out the kitchen window, but I was seeing the lab in my mind. The equipment, the logbooks, the years of accumulated knowledge. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was a company. My company. "I want to build it myself," I said, the words feeling more right than anything I'd said in years. "On my own terms." Her smile was all the validation I needed. The shock was gone. The hurt was still there. A dull ache in the background, but it was being rapidly replaced by something else. A cold, methodical, and deeply satisfying sense of purpose. Camille wanted a fast-fail culture. She was about to get a lesson in it, a spectacular company-defining failure, and I was going to be the one teaching the class. The resolve wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. I was taking back my work, my time, my future, and it was going to be glorious. The next morning, I didn't wake up with the jolt of an alarm clock. I woke up with the sun, a strange and welcome change. The first 20 minutes of my day were usually a frantic rush, showering, dressing, grabbing a piece of toast, and mentally preparing for the day's battles at Innovatech. This morning, there was only silence. It was a blank canvas. For a moment, the old anxiety crept back in, the feeling of being rudderless. But then I remembered the conversation with Sarah, the new clarity. This wasn't an end. It was a beginning. After a proper breakfast, I went down to my lab. This time, it wasn't for solace. It was for a strategic assessment. I was no longer an R&D director. I was the founder and sole employee of a startup that didn't have a name yet. My first order of business was to take inventory of my primary asset, the intellectual property. I spent the entire morning collating my research. I gathered all 16 of the leather-bound logbooks. I booted up my personal workstation, a custom-built tower with a processor that could handle complex simulations, and began organizing my data. Years of simulation results, material analysis spreadsheets, high-resolution microscope images, and fabrication data were spread across multiple hard drives. None of it had ever touched Innovatech's servers. I had been paranoid about their IT department's data scraping policies for years, and my paranoia had paid off. I consolidated everything onto a single, encrypted 10 terabyte solid-state drive. Then I made 2 physical backups, which I planned to store in a safe deposit box and at my lawyer's office. This wasn't just about the recipe for the battery. That was the easy part. The hard part, the part that was truly impossible to reverse engineer, was the process. It was the why behind the what. For example, the ceramic electrolyte I had developed needed to be sintered in a 3-stage process. The first stage, a slow ramp to 600 degrees Celsius, burned off the polymer binder. The second, a rapid spike to 1150 degrees, fused the ceramic particles. But the third stage, a long, 48-hour soak at a very specific 875 degrees, was the real secret. That was when the crystalline structure aligned perfectly, eliminating the micro voids that led to short circuits. Anyone analyzing the final product would see the crystal structure, but they would have no way of knowing the precise, counterintuitive thermal journey required to create it. It had taken me 2 years and hundreds of failed attempts to discover that specific 3-stage cycle. That information existed in exactly 2 places: my brain and logbook number 12. Then there were the materials themselves. I had sourced a specific grade of lanthanum garnet powder from a small boutique chemical supplier in Germany. They were the only ones who could produce it with the purity I needed, below 10 parts per million of sodium contamination. I had spent months building a relationship with their head chemist, a man named Klaus. My orders were personal, placed from my home email address and paid for with my own credit card. Innovatech's procurement department didn't even know this supplier existed. They had a list of approved large-scale vendors who couldn't meet the specs. When Camille's new team tried to source the raw materials, they would fail at the first step, and they wouldn't even know why. This was my fortress, not built of stone and mortar, but of data, process, and relationships. It was a fortress Camille and Innovatech didn't know they were laying siege to. They thought they had the keys to the kingdom, but all they had was a postcard of the castle. My second step was to call Arthur, my lawyer friend. I caught him just as he was heading to lunch. "Grant, good to hear from you. How's the golf swing?" he asked, his voice booming over the phone. "Rusty, Arthur. I've been a little busy. Listen, I need to switch this from a friendly chat to a professional one. I need to retain you. I was fired yesterday." There was a pause. "Fired? Grant, you're the bedrock of that place. What happened?" I gave him the short version: the new innovation chief, the clash of styles, the obsession with cost-cutting, and the final clean cut. I told him about the battery project and the fact that all the critical work had been done in my personal lab. Arthur let out a low whistle. "Oh, she stepped in it. She stepped in it big time. Grant, this is beautiful. It's an IP lawyer's dream. I need to know where I stand, Arthur, legally." "Okay, let's walk through it," he said, his voice shifting into professional gear. "Your employment agreement. Did it have a specific inventions clause that assigned rights for work done off hours or off site? I sent it to you a year ago for that hypothetical question, remember? You said it was ancient and vague." "I remember," Arthur said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "It's boilerplate from the 90s. It assigns the company rights to inventions developed within the scope of employment. That's the key phrase. We can argue very persuasively that since they deliberately denied you the resources, budget, and equipment to pursue this research, it fell outside the scope of your employment. You were forced to pursue it as a private individual on your own time, with your own capital. You're not just the inventor, Grant. You're the investor, the project manager, and the entire R&D department. Your home lab isn't a hobby, it's a private research facility." "What about the prototypes I gave them?" I asked. "A gift," Arthur said immediately, "or more accurately, a demonstration. You provided them with a few sample units to showcase a potential technology. You never transferred the underlying intellectual property or the trade secrets required for replication. Did you ever sign any document specifically assigning the battery technology to them?" "Never." "Then they have nothing," Arthur concluded. "They have 4 inert objects. They can't legally replicate them, and even if they tried, they can't physically do it. This is an open and shut case of personal property. Don't sign a single thing they send you. Let me handle all communication from now on. We're going to send them a very polite, very firm letter, informing them that the battery technology, which we'll call Keystone, is your personal intellectual property, and that any attempt to replicate or commercialize it will be met with swift and severe legal action. Hearing him say it, laying it all out so clearly, was like having a steel spine inserted into my back. Keystone, I said. I like that. Keystone battery. It's perfect, Arthur said. So what's the plan? You want to license it to them for an obscene amount of money? No, I said, a cold certainty in my voice. They had their chance to invest in this technology, and they passed. I'm going to build it myself. I'm starting my own company. Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, a genuine delighted sound. Grant, you magnificent bastard. I love it. Okay, we'll need to set up an LLC immediately. We'll trademark the name. We'll get our ducks in a row. This is going to be fun. My third step was to activate my network, not for jobs, but for intelligence. I sent a simple text message to Martin, the young lab tech I had mentored for the last 5 years. Martin was sharp, dedicated, and fiercely loyal. I had personally recruited him out of university. He saw me as a mentor, and I saw him as the future of the department. My text was simple. Hey Martin, as you've probably heard, I'm no longer with the company. Keep your head down, do good work, and be careful. Let me know if you need anything. I knew he'd understand the subtext. He was now my man on the inside. His reply came 2 hours later. This is insane, Grant. The whole lab is in shock. Camille just held a meeting. She said she's unleashing our potential now that the old bureaucracy is gone. She wants us to have a production-ready plan for the Novacell in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. We don't even know what's in it. She's delusional. The seed was planted. The chaos would begin soon. The final piece of my plan was to think like my enemy. Camille and David were business people. They thought in terms of markets, partners, and profits. The battery itself was just an abstraction to them. Its real value was in the multi-billion-dollar deals it could unlock. Their primary target, I knew, was a major automotive company. Let's call them Volta Motors, a high-end EV manufacturer known for its innovation. Innovatech had been trying to get a meeting with Volta's CEO for months. The Novacell prototypes were their ticket in. I went to my computer and began drafting a new presentation. It was clean, professional, and filled with the hard data that engineers and executives at a place like Volta would appreciate. I included cycle life charts, energy density comparisons, and thermal stability graphs. At the end, I put a single, powerful slide. Keystone Battery LLC, a scalable next-generation energy solution, ready for partnership. I didn't reach out to them yet. It was too soon. First, I needed Innovatech to fail on their own. I needed them to walk up to the plate, take a big swing at the ball, and miss so completely that the entire stadium fell silent. My plan wasn't just to win. It was to let them demonstrate their own incompetence to the world. That evening, Sarah came home to find me not in the basement, but at the dining room table, surrounded by legal pads and printouts. I was sketching out a business plan, a roadmap for funding, and a list of key personnel I wanted to hire, starting with Martin. Well, she said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile, you look like you've found a new project. I've found a new company, I replied, looking up at her. The ache of betrayal was still there, but it was now a motivator, a fuel source. It was a data point, just like a failed experiment. It taught me something vital. Loyalty, I realized, should be a two-way street. For 27 years I had been loyal to a company. From now on I would be loyal to the work itself and to the people who respected it. Camille thought she had streamlined the company. She thought she had cut out the dead wood. But what she had actually done was hand me a head start in a race she didn't even know we were running. She was at the starting line, waving a flag, while I was already halfway to the finish, with the blueprints for a better car in my pocket. The secret plan was in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the sound of the crash. The first 2 weeks were quiet, deceptively so. I focused on the architecture of my new reality. Arthur filed the paperwork to incorporate Keystone Battery LLC. I opened a business bank account, designed a simple but professional logo, and built a placeholder website. It felt strange, almost like a fantasy, to be building something from scratch that was entirely my own. There were no committees to consult, no budget approvals to seek, no one to tell me my ideas were too ambitious. The only limit was my own vision. During this time I received the official severance package via courier. It was as insulting as I'd expected. 6 months' pay in exchange for my signature on an ironclad non-compete, and a non-disclosure agreement that would effectively gag me for life. It also contained a clause that explicitly assigned all intellectual property, conceived or developed in whole or in part during my employment, to Innovatech. It was a brazen attempt to retroactively claim my life's work. I scanned it and emailed it to Arthur. His reply was a single sentence: "Let them dream." He sent back a formal, polite letter to Innovatech's legal department on my behalf, stating that I was rejecting their offer and that all future correspondence should be directed through his office. We also included the letter of notice about the Keystone technology being my personal property. It was the legal equivalent of drawing a line in the sand. Meanwhile, my insider, Martin, was providing a running commentary on the slow-motion train wreck unfolding at Innovatech. His texts were a mixture of frustration and dark humor. Day 3 of Operation Reverse Engineer. One message read: Camille brought in a team of materials consultants. They spent the morning in a conference room with one of the prototypes and a box of donuts. I don't think they even know how to turn on the electron microscope. A few days later, they cut one of the cells open, in the open air, not in an argon-filled glove box. The lithium metal anode instantly oxidized. The whole thing is a paperweight now. They ruined one of only 4 samples. Camille is furious, but she's blaming us for improper handling protocols. The protocols she never asked for and we don't have. And my favorite, today's brilliant idea from the consultants. They're trying to analyze the ceramic electrolyte using mass spectrometry. They're going to get a list of elements, which they could have gotten from a textbook. It won't tell them the crystalline phase, the doping concentration, or the layering sequence. It's like trying to understand a microchip by melting it down to see what it's made of. These guys are getting paid $1,000 an hour. I read these messages with a grim sense of satisfaction. It was exactly as I had predicted. They were archaeologists trying to rebuild a civilization from a single perfect vase. They could admire it. They could analyze its chemical composition, but they could never understand the society, the tools, or the 1,000 years of technique that went into creating it. The pressure on Camille was clearly mounting. According to Martin, David, the CEO, was asking for daily progress reports on the Novacell production plan. The company had already started teasing the technology to investors and the press. A major industry trade show was coming up in 2 months, and Camille had promised David they would have a live demonstration and be ready to announce their first major production partner. Her career, and a significant chunk of the company's market valuation, was riding on this launch. Her panic started to manifest in increasingly erratic behavior. She called mandatory 7 a.m. meetings. She sent rambling, passive-aggressive emails at midnight. She started walking the lab floor, a place she had previously avoided, looking over people's shoulders and asking questions that revealed her profound ignorance of the science. "Why can't we just use a different ceramic?" she'd ask. "This one from the approved vendor list is half the price." Martin would have to patiently explain, for the 10th time, that the cheaper ceramic had the wrong ionic conductivity and would crack under a thermal load. The breaking point was inevitable. It came a month after my departure. My phone rang. It was an internal number from Innovatech. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message popped up. It was Camille. Her voice, usually so controlled and cool, was strained. "Grant, it's Camille. We need to talk. There seems to be some discrepancy in the documentation for the Novacell project. The data you left is incomplete. We need the full research notes and the fabrication logs to move forward with the production scale-up. It's company property. Grant, call me back as soon as you get this. We need to resolve this today." I saved the voicemail. It was a beautiful thing. The first crack in the dam. She was no longer the all-knowing chief innovation officer. She was a manager who had lost control of her project. The phrase company property was a bluff, and we both knew it. She was fishing, hoping I was ignorant or scared enough to just hand it over. I forwarded the audio file to Arthur with the note, "Phase 1 complete." Arthur's advice was simple. Silence. Don't respond. Let her stew. Let the pressure build. The next call will be from her boss. He was right. But before that call came, I decided it was time to make my first real move. The quiet period of preparation was over. It was time to introduce Keystone Battery to the world. I had been keeping a close watch on Volta Motors, the EV company. I knew from my time at Innovatech that their VP of engineering, a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, was a brilliant no-nonsense engineer with a PhD in electrochemistry. She was a scientist, not a salesperson. She would respond to data, not buzzword. I spent a week refining my pitch. I wasn't going to badmouth Innovatech. It would be unprofessional and petty. I would simply present my technology as a superior, more mature solution. I built a new prototype in my lab, identical to the ones Innovatech had. But I also created a detailed presentation that included not just the performance data, but a clear, credible roadmap for mass production. I included schematics for the custom manufacturing equipment required, a list of secured raw material suppliers, including my German contact Klaus, and a projected cost per cell at scale. This was the package that Camille couldn't even begin to assemble. Finding Dr. Thorne's direct contact information wasn't easy, but years of networking at industry conferences had given me a thick Rolodex. A friend of a friend put me in touch. I sent a short professional email. "Dear Dr. Thorne, my name is Grant, founder of Keystone Battery. We have developed a novel solid-state battery technology with an energy density exceeding 500. I believe it may be of significant interest to Volta's future vehicle platforms. I have attached a brief technical overview. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss this further at your convenience. Sincerely, Grant." No sales pitch, no fluff, just the data. I attached the presentation and hit send. The ball was in her court. For 3 days I heard nothing. I started to worry. Maybe she dismissed it as spam. Maybe she was too busy. Maybe the idea was just not compelling enough. The self-doubt was a familiar, unwelcome guest. Then on a Thursday afternoon, an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was Aris Thorne, Volta Motors. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. "Grant, this is impressive, very impressive. The energy density figures are a significant leap forward, but it's the cycle life and thermal stability data that really have my attention. Your proposed production process seems well thought out, not just theoretical. I'm in town next week. Are you available to meet? I'd like to see a demonstration cell. Best, Aris." I read the email 3 times. It was happening. It was real. I wrote back immediately, confirming my availability. We set a meeting for the following Wednesday at a neutral location, a small tech incubator office space I rented for a day. The same day I confirmed my meeting with Volta, Martin sent me another update from the front lines at Innovatech. "It's getting ugly." David called Camille into his office this morning. The door was closed, but we could hear him yelling. The words "unacceptable delays in shareholder confidence" were audible. Camille came out looking like she'd seen a ghost. "The consultants have been fired." She's now telling us we need to work from first principles to recreate the results. She still doesn't get it. That would take 5 years and a team of 50, not 6 weeks and a team of 5. The pieces were moving on the board exactly as I'd planned. Innovatech was flailing, their credibility withering by the day, and I was about to have a private audience with their number one target. The day of the meeting, I was nervous, but it was a good kind of nervous. The energy of a challenge, not the dread of failure. I set up in the rented conference room. I had my laptop, a large monitor, and one of my precious fully functional Keystone cells. It was sitting on a simple velvet cloth in the middle of the table, connected to a small testing unit that displayed its voltage and charge state. Dr. Eris Thorne arrived precisely on time. She was a tall, athletic woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She shook my hand firmly. "Grant, Eris Thorne, thanks for making the time. Dr. Thorne, the pleasure is all mine." We spent the next 2 hours in a deep technical dive. She didn't ask about my company's size or my funding. She asked about the grain boundaries in the ceramic. She asked about the cathode chemistry and the anode deposition process. She asked intelligent, probing questions that showed she understood the immense difficulty of what I had accomplished. I answered every question with data, pulling up microscope images and simulation graphs. Finally, she pointed to the cell on the table. "And this is a functional unit?" "It is," I said. I connected it to a small high-powered LED array. The light that flooded the room was incredibly bright, almost blinding, fully charged, and completely stable. You can heat it, puncture it, it won't go into thermal runaway. She watched the lights for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at me. "I'm aware that Innovatech is supposedly developing a similar technology which they're calling the Nova Cell." I kept my expression neutral. I was the director of R&D at Innovatech until about a month ago. I led that project. Her eyes narrowed slightly, connecting the dots. "So this," she said, gesturing to the battery and the data on the screen, "is the real thing. And what they have is, they have a few demonstration units I built for them," I said carefully. "But they do not have the intellectual property, the process knowledge, or the capability to manufacture it. That all belongs to my new company, Keystone Battery." A slow smile spread across her face. "I see. We had a meeting scheduled with their CEO next month. He's been very persistent. I think I'm going to have to postpone that indefinitely." She stood up and extended her hand. "Grant, this has been the most interesting meeting I've had all year. My team and I are going to review this internally. Don't go signing any deals with our competitors just yet." As I watched her leave, I knew I had won. It wasn't just a victory over Camille. It was a validation of my entire life's work. My silent takeover was no longer silent. I had fired the first public shot, and it had hit its target perfectly. Innovatech wasn't just going to fail at their launch. They were going to be rendered irrelevant before they even got there, and their panic was about to escalate to a whole new level. The news of Volta Motors putting their talks with Innovatech on ice rippled through the industry with surprising speed. It wasn't a public press release, but in the tight-knit world of high-tech manufacturing and venture capital, news like that travels through back channels. A whispered word at a conference, a canceled meeting that gets noticed, a supplier who mentions that Volta's purchasing inquiries have suddenly gone cold. Innovatech's carefully constructed narrative of being the next big thing in battery tech began to fray at the edges. Their stock, which had been climbing on the Novacell hype, dipped a few points. It wasn't a crash, but it was a tremor, a warning of the earthquake to come. Inside Innovatech, the tremor felt like a magnitude 9. Martin's reports became a daily chronicle of escalating desperation. "Camille is a ghost," he texted. "She either locks herself in her office all day, or she's in closed-door meetings with David and the legal team. The lab has ground to a halt." We have no direction. She took the remaining 3 prototypes and locked them in her office safe, as if we were going to steal them. We couldn't do anything with them if we wanted to. The power vacuum she created was having a predictable effect on the team. The best people, the ones with options, started to quietly update their resumes. They were scientists and engineers, not politicians. They wanted to solve problems and build things, not be pawns in a corporate drama they didn't understand. The culture of innovation that Camille claimed to be building had curdled into one of fear, blame, and stagnation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. It was time to give the best people a place to land. My first call was to Martin. We met for coffee, far from the Innovatech campus. He looked exhausted, the spark of enthusiasm I had always seen in his eyes replaced by a weary cynicism. "It's a nightmare, Grant," he said, stirring his latte. "She's trying to get us to sign new, more restrictive NDAs. The legal department is breathing down our necks. She's convinced one of us is leaking information." "I'm not going to ask you to do that, Martin," I said. "In fact, I'm asking you to do the opposite. I want you to quit." He looked up, startled. "I'm offering you a job at Keystone Battery," I continued. "Position of senior research scientist, a 10% salary increase over what you're making now, and more importantly, 5% equity in the company. You'll be a founding member of the team." His eyes widened. The equity was the real carrot. It was a chance to own a piece of the success he would help build, something Innovatech would never offer. "You're serious," he whispered. "Completely. I can't build this alone, Martin. I need people I trust. I need people who understand the work. I need you." He didn't have to think about it. A huge grin spread across his face, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "When do I start?" "Give your 2 weeks' notice tomorrow," I said. "Be professional. Don't burn any bridges, as tempting as it might be. Just say you've received an offer you can't refuse. You don't need to say where." Martin's resignation was the first domino. When the most promising young scientist in the lab quit without a destination, it sent a shockwave through the department. The other senior members of the team, people I had worked with for years, started reaching out to me. Dr. Elena Vance, our lead analytical chemist, called me that weekend. "Grant, I'm not sure what you're doing, but I heard Martin is leaving. If you have room for a chemist with 20 years of experience in spectroscopy, I'm listening." Then came Ben Carter, my best mechanical engineer, the man who designed the casings and thermal management systems for all our projects. "They want me to design a mass production line for a product we can't even build a single unit of," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This place is a circus. Are you hiring?" Within a week, I had secured the core of my old team. Elena and Ben both resigned from Innovatech, and I brought them into Keystone with the same promise: competitive salaries and a meaningful stake in the company. We were a skeleton crew, but we were the right skeleton. We had the knowledge, the experience, and the shared history of trust. We set up a temporary office and lab space in a commercial-grade building, and the energy was electric. We were no longer employees. We were builders. The talent exodus hit Innovatech like a body blow. They had lost their R&D director, their top young scientist, their lead chemist, and their best engineer in the span of a month. The NovaCell project wasn't just stalled, it was dead on the launch pad. All that remained was a clueless manager, a handful of demoralized junior techs, and a few shiny prototypes locked in a safe. This was when the real desperation kicked in. Camille's next call came from a blocked number. I answered it on speakerphone, with Arthur listening in on a conference line. Her voice was different this time. The brittle confidence was gone, replaced by a strained, almost pleading tone. "Grant, we need to talk. This has gone on long enough." "I'm listening, Camille," I said calmly. "Look," she sighed. A sound of pure frustration. Martin, Elena, Ben. This looks bad. It's obvious you're poaching my team. Your team, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. These are talented people, Camille. They're free to work wherever they feel valued. I made them an offer. They accepted. It's called a free market. I believe that's a concept they teach in business school. Arthur snorted softly on the other end of the line. She ignored the jibe. This is not productive. David is concerned. The board is concerned. The delays on the Novacell project are becoming a serious issue. That does sound like a problem, I said, my voice flat and unsympathetic. Okay, look, she said, her voice dropping. Let's be pragmatic. What do you want? Is this about your old job? We can talk about that. A reinstatement. We can create a new senior VP role. More money. A bigger budget. We can put this all behind us as a misunderstanding. It was the offer I knew would eventually come. The desperate, last-ditch attempt to buy back the expertise she had so arrogantly thrown away. The idea that my work, my loyalty, my entire career could be reduced to a negotiation over a title and a salary was so deeply insulting. It was almost funny. I let the silence stretch out, savoring it. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Waiting, a misunderstanding. I finally said, my voice cold as ice. There was no misunderstanding. Camille, you made your position very clear. My methods were too slow. I was a bottleneck. I was part of the old bureaucracy you were hired to dismantle. You got exactly what you wanted. You have a lean, agile R&D department. The only problem is, it can't do any R&D. She was speechless. Let me make this simple for you, I continued. Keystone Battery is not for sale. My team is not for hire, and I have absolutely no interest in returning to Innovate Tech in any capacity. However, I am a businessman now, and I do offer consulting services. Consulting? She asked, a flicker of hope in her voice. Yes, my personal consulting fee to help you understand the depth of the strategic blunder you've made is $1 million per day, with a 30-day non-refundable minimum. Billed in advance. There was a choked, sputtering sound from the other end of the line. $1 million, that's insane. That's extortion. No, Camille, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Extortion is what you do when you have leverage. This is just the price of admission. It's the cost of the education you're about to receive. You wanted to fail fast. Congratulations. You're succeeding beyond your wildest dreams. Do you want my wire transfer details, or was that all? I hung up before she could respond. Arthur burst out laughing. $1 million a day, Grant. That was poetry. Pure. Unadulterated. Boardroom poetry. She thought it was a negotiation. I said, she still thinks this is a problem that money can solve. She doesn't understand. It was never about the money. It was about respect. The power had shifted completely. I was no longer the discarded employee. I was the competition. I had the technology. I had the team. And I had the attention of their most coveted partner. They were in a free fall. And they had just realized they had fired the only man who knew how to build a parachute. Their next move wouldn't be an offer. It would be a surrender. The fallout from my $1 million a day consulting offer was immediate and profound. It wasn't a serious business proposal, and we both knew it. It was a statement. It was a way of saying you can't afford me, not in terms of money, but in terms of value. You had this. You threw it away. The price to get it back is not one you can pay. According to the scuttlebutt that now flowed freely from my growing network of industry contacts, my conversation with Camille became the stuff of legend within Innovatech's upper management. She had apparently gone straight to David, the CEO, demanding that the company sue me for everything from poaching to corporate sabotage. but the legal department, having reviewed the letter from my lawyer Arthur and my ancient employment contract, poured cold water on her fury. They had no case. I hadn't violated a non-compete because I hadn't signed one. I hadn't stolen trade secrets because the secrets were demonstrably my own. And hiring people who had willingly resigned from a toxic work environment wasn't poaching, it was just smart recruiting. Innovatech was trapped, and it was a cage of their own making. The official launch date for the Novacell was now just a few weeks away. The company had booked a major hall for a press event. They had sent out invitations to journalists, analysts, and potential investors. The entire event was predicated on a lie. The lie that they had a revolutionary product ready for market. Every day that passed, that lie became more dangerous and more expensive. The final desperate call came not from Camille but from her boss, David, the CEO. His name flashed on my phone, and I let it ring once before answering. This was the call that mattered. "Grant," he said. His voice was tired, stripped of the usual executive bluster. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in days. "David," I replied, my tone level and professional. "I think we need to have a serious conversation," he said. "Face to face. No lawyers, no games. Just you and me. What's it going to take to fix this?" I agreed to meet him. Not because I thought we could fix anything, but because I wanted to look him in the eye when the final power shift occurred. We met at a neutral high-end hotel bar, a place where quiet, expensive conversations could happen without being overheard. David looked older than I remembered. The stress had carved new lines around his eyes. He got straight to the point. "Grant, this is a mess, a complete and utter mess. Camille, she misjudged the situation. Badly. I'll admit that. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, and it was still couched in the language of management failure, not personal accountability. She was your hire, David," I said simply. "You empowered her." He winced, but didn't deny it. "Look, what's done is done. Right now I have a board of directors demanding answers, and a stock price that's taking a beating every time a rumor about the Novacell project leaks. I have a press event in 2 weeks that's going to be a public humiliation. I need a solution." "What solution did you have in mind?" I asked, taking a slow sip of my water. "We want to buy you out," he said. "We want to acquire Keystone Battery, all of it, the IP, the data. You, your team, will make you a rich man, Grant. Name your price. We'll bring you all back in-house, give you your own division, full autonomy. Just help me make this go away." Here it was, the end game. They weren't trying to hire me anymore. They were trying to buy the company they could have been, the future they had thrown away. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. They were asking me to sell them the lifeboat after they had sunk the ship. I looked at him. A man who dealt in numbers, acquisitions, and assets. He saw this as just another transaction. He didn't understand the human element. The years of work, the sting of betrayal. He was trying to put a price tag on my vindication. "You're right, David," I said slowly. "What's done is done, and you're right to be worried. Because Volta Motors isn't just postponing their talks with you. I signed a letter of intent with them yesterday. They're backing Keystone Battery. We're finalizing a joint venture to build a new gigafactory in Nevada." The color drained from David's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Volta wasn't just a potential customer. They were the validation the entire market was waiting for. Whoever they partnered with was the de facto winner of the battery wars. "Not all of it," I said. "God, no. I don't want the bureaucracy, the dead-end projects, or the layers of middle management. I'm not interested in your brand or your stock listing. But you have assets that are valuable to me. You have a state-of-the-art lab facility that is currently sitting idle. You have some good long-term supply contracts. And you have about 50 talented chemists, engineers, and technicians on your payroll who are terrified for their jobs right now. I'm interested in acquiring those specific assets, including the building. I slid a folder across the table. It was a formal proposal, drafted by Arthur and vetted by a team of M&A specialists that Volta's Capital had allowed me to hire. It was an offer to purchase Innovatech's entire R&D division, the physical labs, the equipment, the existing material contracts, and the right to offer employment to the staff for a price that was not coincidentally about 30% of Innovatech's currently distressed market capitalization. David opened the folder and stared at the numbers. His hands were trembling slightly. This is a takeover," he whispered. "No," I corrected him. "This is a rescue mission. You are going to announce that you're spinning off your R&D division to a new dynamic partner in order to focus on your core business, whatever that is now. Your shareholders will see it as a smart move to cut your losses. You'll get a much-needed cash infusion. You'll save face. Your press event will be canceled due to a strategic realignment, and I get everything I need to scale up. Keystone Battery 5 years faster than I could on my own. It's a win-win." The ultimate vindication wasn't just watching them fail. It was becoming the thing that saved them from total collapse on my own terms. It was absorbing the best parts of my old company into my new one, leaving the rot behind. He looked up from the folder, his eyes hollow. He knew he had no other move. His bluff had been called. His army was deserting, and his enemy was offering him a peaceful surrender that let him keep his title. "And Camille?" he asked, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Camille is a personnel issue," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "That will be your problem to solve. But she will not be part of the division I am acquiring. That is a non-negotiable term." He nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say. The deal was done. I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "My lawyers will be in touch with your lawyers to finalize the details," I said. I turned and walked out of the bar, not looking back. I didn't feel triumphant or giddy. I felt a profound, quiet sense of balance being restored. The world was right side up again. The final confrontation wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic scene. It was a sterile, procedural board meeting a month later, held to finalize the sale of Innovatech's R&D assets to Keystone Battery. I was there not as a former employee, but as the buyer, flanked by my lawyer and 2 executives from Volta Motors. On the other side of the massive mahogany table sat David and the Innovatech board, and sitting slightly behind them, not at the main table, was Camille. She looked small, diminished. The power suit and the confident posture were gone, replaced by a gray dress and a hunted look in her eyes. She wasn't a participant in the meeting. She was an observer, a ghost at the feast. Her agile revolution had ended here, with her watching her entire division get carved out and sold to the man she had dismissed as a relic. Our eyes met for a brief second across the table. I gave her nothing. No anger, no pity, no acknowledgement at all. I looked straight through her as if she were a pane of glass. That, I think, was the final, deepest cut, the realization that she no longer mattered. She had been rendered irrelevant. The deal was signed. I now owned the very labs I had been cast out of. The next day I held an all-hands meeting in the main atrium of the R&D building. My old building, my new building. I stood before the assembled staff, the familiar faces of my former colleagues, their expressions a mixture of hope and anxiety. I saw Martin, Elena, and Ben in the front row, their smiles beaming. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Grant, and I am the founder and CEO of Keystone Battery. For many of you, this is a reintroduction. As of today, this facility and everyone in it is part of the Keystone family. I know the last few months have been filled with uncertainty, and I want to put that to rest right now. Your jobs are secure, your salaries are secure, and for the first time in a long time, your work will be the #1 priority of this organization." A wave of relief washed over the room. "We have one goal," I continued. my voice resonating with a passion I hadn't felt in years. To build the best battery technology in the world, no more pointless meetings, no more buzzword bingo, no more budget cuts that hamstring innovation. We are going to be a company of builders, of scientists, of engineers. Your expertise is our greatest asset, and you will be treated as such. We have the funding, we have the partners, and now we have the team. Welcome to Keystone Battery. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a genuine cathartic release. It was the sound of hope returning. Later that week I was walking through the main lab, my lab, and saw a courier delivering a standard cardboard box to the front desk. It was addressed to Camille. It was her personal effects, being sent to her home. David had fired her the day after the sale was finalized. A quiet, unceremonious end to her brief and disastrous reign. The system had corrected itself. She was a bug that had been patched out. In the months that followed, Keystone Battery thrived. With the full resources of the lab and the brilliance of the reunited team, we optimized the production process with incredible speed. We hit every milestone in our agreement with Volta Motors. The Gigafactory in Nevada broke ground. We were on the cover of industry magazines. Innovatech, stripped of its innovative core, pivoted to become a distributor of specialty chemicals, a pale shadow of its former self. My new office was the one that had belonged to the R&D director. My office. I didn't change the furniture. It felt right. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by with lunch. She stood in the doorway, looking at me sitting behind the desk, a blueprint for a new production line spread out before me. "It suits you," she said, smiling. "Being in charge." "It's not about being in charge," I said, looking up at her. "It's about being able to do the work, the real work, without having to fight for it." She came over and kissed me. "I'm proud of you, Grant. You didn't just get even. You built something better." She was right. The revenge wasn't the point. The vindication was. It was the proof to myself and to the world that competence matters, that experience is not a liability, that you can't strip mine a company's soul and expect it to survive. They thought they could own the innovation without respecting the innovator. It's a fatal mistake that arrogant managers make every single day. They think people are interchangeable, that a process on a flowchart is the same as the deep tacit knowledge in a person's head. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. And when you lose it, the cost to get it back can be the entire company. So here I am. I'm Grant, and I'm no longer just an R&D director. I'm a founder. I took the disrespect and betrayal and used it as fuel. I didn't burn their house down. I built a better one next door, and then bought their land when the bank came to foreclose. The best revenge isn't a fiery confrontation, it's quiet, strategic, and overwhelming success. It's creating a new reality where the people who undervalued you are forced to watch you thrive. This story is for anyone who has ever been sidelined, underestimated, or told they were part of the old way of doing things. Your knowledge, your experience, that is your real property. Don't ever let anyone take it from you for a cheap price. Know your value, and if the place you're at refuses to recognize it, then maybe it's time to find a place that will. Or better yet, build it yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me about a time a new boss came in with a bunch of fancy buzzwords and zero common sense. Let's share our stories. And of course, if you want to hear more tales of corporate karma and professional vindication, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.